Hey everybody, it's Reverend Jonathan here. I am coming to you live from my hotel room in Atlanta, Georgia. I have spent the morning here as the guest speaker at the center, or the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta, and I'm so grateful that they invited me to be with them today. They've also offered me and given me access to the video of my talk today, which I decided I was going to come online and wanted to share with all of you. Some of it you may have heard before, some of it you may not have heard before, but I'm grateful that they've allowed me to do it. I want to also give a shout out to those who are in Tucson who are meeting in person today as part of the Spiritual Living Circle, which is being led by Robbie Jean Chandler. And I'm so grateful for them taking the reins and really moving forward with also allowing the Spirit to move through them and have a continued conversation in person. But since I'm not there, I wanted to connect with the online community, and that's you, and offer this. So here is my talk from today at the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. Here we go.
In Tucson, Arizona, where he was born, and he went to university there. He received his degree in theater production, acting, and directing. He has spent much of his professional life as a singer and as an actor in Los Angeles, California. He had a success also as an Emmy Award-nominated television producer in New York City. Following years of training at the Global Truth Center, that's in Los Angeles, Jonathan was called in 2011 to serve as the minister for the Center of Spiritual Living in Toronto, Canada, where he was there until mid-2017. I also have to say, not only was he a minister for that community, he also found his husband, and they've been married, and it's taken, God bless them both, 18 months to get a green card. But that is now happening, and his partner will be joining him in November. So we're excited for him. What's also exciting for Jonathan is currently he's building his next dream right back in his hometown of Tucson. In early 2018, he founded the Tucson New Thought Center for Spiritual Evolution. As the center grows, so will the vision of a full-time spiritual getaway center. So not a retreat center, so don't get that confused, but a place for awakening our minds to advance. A thriving online media presence with curated and created content, a full-time hub where anyone can just drop in for inspiration, have a cup of coffee, chat about deeper aspects of spiritual life, all in a relaxed atmosphere. Doesn't that sound amazing? I know it's going to be a huge success. I have the honor of serving with Jonathan. He is the chair of the awards committee for Centers for Spiritual Living, which I am also a member of. So I've gotten to get to know him personally. You are going to love this man. I know you'll love him as much as I do. Please help me welcome Reverend Jonathan Zenz.
It's a funny thing when you hear all these, when speakers come, we're asked for bios, and it's like, oh, well, those are all the things that I wrote, and yeah. But it's funny when you're introduced, you feel like, oh, I have to live up to some expectations now. Take a breath. I move a lot, by the way. I want you to look at your neighbor. Maybe someone that you've not really noticed today yet. Just take a look around. Recognize the magnificence in the faces of every single person you see. Because that is the truth. Each and every one of us is magnificent. Yeah. I want to thank you all for inviting me to be with you today. I'm sitting here, I'm like, my theatrical training is going, okay, there's a good spot for light. If I walk over here, I've dropped out of it a little bit. Oh, there's another one. I'm so grateful to be here and to be with this magnificent community. I love a thriving community, and this is a thriving community, and I'm so grateful to be able to share with you what I have to offer today. I want to say thank you to David for really. I was saying to him when I flew in. Was that Friday? When did I fly? I flew in on Friday. And I said, I've never spent any time in Atlanta except for 3 hours in the airport several years ago. And then my Facebook pops up this morning, and it was 3 years ago today that I spent 3 hours at the airport. So there's something about September 23rd, I guess, that I'm meant to be in Atlanta. David and I had dinner on Friday night, and it was, and last night. And it was very funny. I was telling him a lot about what's going on for me in my life, and he says, oh, well, you got to talk about that. And I thought, well, how can I wrap that into forgiveness? I can. The universe always conspires for our highest good, and so what needs to be said today is what's going to be said. I'm going to start with this from Ernest Holmes, though. Forgiveness is a demonstration that the creative principle within us is greater than any use we have ever made of it. And by not stepping into forgiveness, we should never be able to transcend the limitation of previous mistakes. I'm going to say that again. Forgiveness is a demonstration that the creative principle within us is greater than any use we have ever made of it. And by not stepping into forgiveness, we should never be able to transcend the limitation of previous mistakes. I've been very inspired by your theme of consider this month. And I love the idea of consideration, because that's all we're ever really doing. We're living in a place and an understanding and an expression of consideration. Because everything we come to in life is a choice. We are always in a place of consideration. Should I do this or should I do this? And much of it ends up being on that subconscious level, below the level of awareness. We're constantly making choices, and that is the great gift that we have from on high. That we are in a place of choice. We get to create the lives we want to create. How many of you are doing that? Or how many of you are just going along with your humdrum, oh, well, I got to do this because this is what everybody has always said I should do, or this is what I've always believed I should do? How many of you have dreams? If there are any hands that are not up right now, no judgment. How many of you are living those dreams? Oh, there are fewer hands. There are fewer hands. You are in a place right here and right now where if you are willing to give in to forgiveness in your life, those dreams will explode into expression. And that's the story I was telling David the other night. That when I stepped into a place of forgiveness, what I was dreaming about became so present in my life. Now, you've heard all those forgiveness platitudes. I'm not here to repeat any of those platitudes. You've all heard them, right? It's like, when you live in blame, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, and all of that stuff. You know that. How many of you have never made a mistake? In forgiveness, we step beyond the limitations of previous mistakes. You know, Ernest Holmes says that no mistakes have ever been made. No mistakes have ever been made. It is only our consideration that something is a mistake that makes it a mistake. No mistakes have ever been made. You are on the perfect path at all times, no matter what. There's another nice hot spot right there. No matter what, you are always on the path of evolution, of evolving into your next greatest expression of self. You cannot be stopped. You cannot be stopped by anything out there. There is only one thing that will ever stop you. It's here. Whatever is within you that is stopping you, you get to decide right here and right now to let it go. Just like in Frozen. Let it go. Just let it go. There's no reason for it any longer. So let us consider mistakes from this moment forward as non-existent. They don't exist. No mistakes have ever been made. We only ever create the conditions to which we are equal to from mind, our own mind. There are no mistakes. We've just convinced ourselves that there are. So, I want to tell you a little bit about my story. So grateful for my story because it got me to where I am today. And I'm grateful also that I can leave it behind when I'm ready to leave it behind. So going to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, was a perfect demonstration for me. It was not what I expected out of the gate of ministerial studies, but it was a perfect demonstration for me. All through my life, I've had a love affair with big cities. I lived in New York City right out of university. When I got my acting and directing degree, where do you go? You go to New York, right? Because I thought, I'm going to be a big Broadway star. I'm going to go there. I'm going to make it. If I can make it there, I can make it anywhere. So I go to New York City, and I flounder. I mean, it was fine. I loved New York, but it was really hard. It's a hard city to live in. Easier when you're in your 20s. I wouldn't go back there now. I still love it. I love to visit. But I just don't think I could live there now. So I go to New York City, and okay, that's not really working out for me. I'm there for 3 years. Say, okay, I'm going to move to Los Angeles. Because that's, if you're going to be an actor, well, you start in New York, and then you go to L.A. So I go to Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is where I really thrived in an acting career. I was able to do stage work consistently for the 12 years that I lived in Los Angeles. I'm so grateful for that. And it was because of the theater that I have found myself in the role of ministry now. I was doing a show called Angels in America in Los Angeles back in 2004, 2005 that took me to a small theater in North Hollywood. And I didn't, it's like I'm just doing my thing, acting. I go into this theater, and there's an energy in this theater. I think, this is a great space. There's something about the vibrational aspect of this space that is so wonderful. And I find out that there's this weird church that's there on Sunday mornings. Now, I was not brought up in religion. I always felt like I had a spiritual sensibility, but I didn't know what that means. I had no structure or understanding of what that meant for me. And as I reflect on it now, I was being pushed in the direction of New Thought for a long time. I remember I was working a job, so sorry, as a telemarketer. And there were some of my workmates who were there, and they said, there's this great place you need to visit. I think you'd really love it. Agape is you got to come to Agape. And I said, nope, I don't do religion. It's not my thing. I don't do religion. And then a few years later, I was doing a show, and somebody came up to me and said, there's this really great place that you have to visit. You're going to love it because it's like not religion, but it is. I'm thinking, well, if it's not religion, but it is, what does that mean? And they said, yeah, the Los Angeles Church of Religious Science. And I said, nope, not doing it. So I'm doing this show, Angels in America, that takes me into what was then known as the NoHo Arts Center. And I meet the owner of the NoHo Arts Center, who I later would come to know as is Reverend James Mellon. And he bought this building, he and his husband bought this building to house their love of the creative spirit through theater and performance, but also be a space for inspiration through the NoHo Arts Center for New Thought, which is what it was called at the time. It is now called the Global Truth Center. A whole long story about they've sold the building. Don't need to get into that. So at the time I was single, and this is an important part of the story because the practitioner that he had at his center was the house manager for the show I was performing in. And I would go up and I would talk to her before the show, and, we'd do all the small talk. I'm single, and I'd love to meet a guy. And she says, there's this great guy. You're going to like him. He comes to our service on Sundays. And I'm like, I don't do religion. Nope, ain't going to happen. And finally I say, you know what? One Sunday isn't going to kill me. It's not going to kill me. So I decide to show up on a Sunday. I meet the guy. He's a lovely, lovely man. And we went on one date. That was it. But from that Sunday forward, I have not missed a Sunday since. Because I sat there in that seat, completely wrapped up in what I was hearing. The message of love, and that we are the creators of our experience. Well, that's not something I had ever heard really. And I had a misunderstanding of religion, because if you really look at the faith traditions of the world, that is the through line of each and every one of them. That is what I have come to truly, deeply understand. And so I honor all faith traditions now. So that's how I came to be a minister, because I was sitting in that chair. 6 months later, I said, that's what I'm meant to be doing. And it illumined something within me. It changed my entire way of being in this world. It changed everything for me. What I had to do, number one, there's my first lesson in forgiveness. Forgive myself for the things I thought I knew. Let go. Let go of what I thought I knew and step into the magnificence that is still yet to be expressed. Yeah, it is a good one. So that's my first lesson in forgiveness. Now, I go all the way through ministerial. This is a long story, by the way. The whole talk is a story. I go through ministerial. Basically, I did it in 5 years instead of 6, which is what it took at the time, to start with Science of Mind 101 and go all the way through the end of Science of Mind 400. They don't use those numbers anymore, but that's the way it was when I was going through it. And on the day that I passed my ministerial panel, you sit in front of 3 ordained ministers and they grill you on spiritual philosophy for an hour, and then they decide whether or not you are, whether you can be a minister at that point. So I finish my panel, I get the letter. Oh, I'm going to covet this letter because it's either going to say yes or no. I open it up, it says yes. Oh, there you go. And I put on Facebook, I passed. That's all I wrote. Now, in the meantime, I had a friend who I had known from Los Angeles who had moved to Toronto, Ontario because of a job, and he had become involved in the Center for Spiritual Living Toronto. And he wrote me that day, and said, congratulations. By the way, our minister resigned 2 weeks ago, and we need a new minister. Well, there's a message from the universe if ever I heard one. When I lived in New York, I dated a guy from Toronto for a little while. He would come down on weekends all the time. And at one point I said, I'm going to come up and see you because you're always coming down there. I went to Toronto in 1996, fell in love with that city. And I was always that thought in my mind, well, someday I'd love to live in Toronto, but I don't know how that's ever going to happen. As an actor, there's no job that's really going to take me there that I can imagine. So, the idea of moving there seemed completely outside the realm of possibility. Until it wasn't. 6 months after that Facebook post, I was stepping into service as the spiritual director for the Center for Spiritual Living Toronto. That was the beginning of my out-of-the-gate jump into ministry. I spent pretty much no time as an assistant minister or a staff minister. I went from school right into spiritual director. And I thought at that point, I've now been proven wrong, that it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Starting a new center from scratch is harder. But also, in many ways, I won't say more fulfilling, it is equally as fulfilling in a very different way. I'm going to quote someone that I find to be very brilliant. This is something that was written several years ago. It's me, by the way. I wrote this to a friend who was experiencing some challenges in his life a few years ago, and I wrote this to him in a text message, and I wrote it down aside from that text message because I thought, if I'm going to be preaching this, I need to be practicing this. I wrote to him, I said, when the experiences in your life begin to unravel, it is because your greatness can no longer be contained by the limitations you've put into place. God cannot be contained, so something new must be born. So I had a really, really wonderful experience in Toronto, and then things started to unravel. And so I had to take that to heart. When the experiences in your life begin to unravel, it is because your greatness can no longer be contained by the limitations that you have put into place. God cannot be contained. Cannot be contained. And so something new must be born. So Easter of 2017, I have been in service for about 6 years at CSL Toronto. The limitations that I created could no longer be contained in that container of Center for Spiritual Living Toronto. I had put that into place. It was my consciousness that brought me to that space and that time and that experience, right? And those were limitations. I created a lovely little bubble. I get to go in and have a fully salaried position as a minister. What could be better than that? It can no longer be contained. I took a deeper understanding of faith to step into the next thing, because I was illumined on Easter of 2017 when I was sitting there in a meeting, and I will admit it was a sort of contentious meeting, and I had this awakening in this meeting. I thought, what was mine to complete here is done. How many of us are willing to do that? To have the moment of recognition to say, what was mine to do here is complete. I can now move to the next expression of my life and perfectly evolve. Take that next step. What is mine to do is complete. I think a lot of us are afraid to really listen to that message when it comes up. So that the container of Center for Spiritual Living Toronto could no longer contain my greatness. I had to now step out and do the next thing, in trusting that because of my leaving, it also had the opportunity as an entity of God to expand into its next expression of evolution. Right? And that's the other thing. We love to convince ourselves. We love to convince ourselves that when we step away, they're not going to be able to survive. How are they ever going to get by? They have thrived in a magnificent way, and I am so grateful. To really, really grasp on to this idea, we have to take a deep dive into a particular aspect of faith, which is where I think the entire New Thought movement is going. In fact, all mystics have said this, but I think we're finally opening up our ears and hearts to hear it and understand it and feel it. My faith is this: I am, you are, we are God. We are God. We are not an aspect of God. We are not the children of God. We are not in God. We are not with God. We are God. We are God. Why is this important? Because if we believe that God is infinite, to think we are somehow separate all of a sudden makes God finite. Think about it. It's logic. It's logic. We are part of infinity. So I go to a sacred journey in Hawaii every year, and one of the great benefits that I have is to go to, on the island of Kauai, there's a Hindu monastery, and every year part of the sacred journey is to go and tour the Hindu monastery, and we've been very blessed with being able to sit and be guided on this tour by one of the Hindu monks there. There are 19 Hindu monks there, and Sadasiva Nathaswami is the one who always greets us and is very invested in New Thought, because he says, you know what? You're teaching the same thing we're teaching. You're just teaching it in a different way. And he said, if God is all there is, and you're part of all that, then that's that. You know, when we really get down to the nuts and bolts of it, we have to be willing to stand up and say, I am God. Is there anyone going? It is not to say that I am God, and so now I have dominion over all things that I see. It is not saying that. It is saying that because I know who I am, and I know who each and every one of you is, now we're all on an equal playing field. It is the great equalizer. When you understand who you are, there can be no racism, there can be no homophobia, there can be no sexism, there can be no isms or phobias. That's the truth. People have a challenge hearing that, though. Ernest Holmes was on this path. You know, we study a book that was written early in his ministry. And it's a wonderful book. There's so much great wisdom in that book. But he was also the one who said, if you're still studying this book in 50 years, you didn't get it. You didn't get it. Because in the seminar lectures, which he gave these series of lectures, and they're published, in the seminar lectures he said this: The relative, that's us. The relative is the absolute at the level of the relative. It's all vibrational, you see. We are vibrating at the level of the relative, but we are the absolute. And this contradicts Thomas Troward. Do you know who Thomas Troward is? Not everybody does. And if you only come on a Sunday, you maybe have heard the name, but you're like, I don't know who that is. He was one of the greatest influences on Ernest Holmes. Thomas Troward and Ralph Waldo Emerson, the two greatest influences on Ernest Holmes. Because Troward said, we enter the absolute to such degree as we withdraw from the relative. Well, there it is. He's saying that there's something separate. And Ernest Holmes said, no, the relative is the absolute at the level of the relative. This level of faith means that we get to step beyond the past and step into true, active evolution. Because we're the ones who are in charge. If you ever wanted to understand why your thoughts create your experience, it's because you are God. God is the only creative power. You're thinking God's thoughts as yourself. That's how life changes. That's how life expands and evolves. It means we can truly step beyond trying to recreate what was. Because boy, do we ever find ourselves doing that. Trying to recreate what was. And a moment of clarity really came over me when I was speaking with David on Friday night at dinner. And it was this: I cannot create my new ministry, Tucson New Thought, in the image of my previous ministry, CSL Toronto. And I realized that all my activities to date have been in that direction, to try to recreate what already has been expressed. I have an opportunity, by starting a ministry from the ground up, to create something entirely new. Change is hard. Change is hard, but you know what? Forgiveness helps. I had to step into forgiveness for myself in that moment to say, you know what? Yes, this is what has been. Let yourself off the hook and move forward. So the result is the birthing of something new, a new expression that I truly believe is in support of this vision, creating a world that works for everyone. Now, here's the irony. The vision was actually born in ministerial studies. I just shoved it aside, went and did my ministry in Toronto, and when I went back and looked at the business plan that I had to write in ministerial studies, because that's one of the things you have to do, you have to write a business plan about starting a ministry from the ground up and how you're going to move forward as a successful business. Because if anyone tells you that this is not a business, they're wrong. It is a business, and you have to have an entrepreneurial spirit to be a spiritual director starting a new center. So I went back and I looked at this business plan. Oh, and what illumination happened in that moment. David already talked about in the introduction. I found that there are these three aspects to my business plan and the getaway. Not trying to be a retreat, because we're never retreating from anything, but we are advancing spiritually into the next expression. And I want to create a getaway center for people to come and be rejuvenated and inspired in the desert, because it's a magnificent place for that experience. Then there's the production element, because I have a background in TV production and theater and acting and all that. I want to create inspirational content and basically enlighten through entertainment, because why not? And I thought, well, those are really lofty goals, like the getaway. Well, that's like a 10 to 15 year goal. I mean, that's a lot of building. You have to build a lot of foundation to create that. Like the production element, that's maybe more like a 5-year goal to start it and then allow it to expand into what it needs to be. So I thought, well, what is going to be my day to day? How am I going to make this work? And I had this idea called the Consciousness Cafe, because I love coffee shops. I spend so much time in coffee shops studying, preparing for classes, things like that. And I thought, the Consciousness Cafe. And it is a space where you can go at any time and be inspired, because the whole point of view of everything that exists within this physical space is inspiration. So, while my initial impulse had been, when I got to Tucson, to create a standard spiritual center environment. Hello, welcome to Tucson New Thought. Here I stand at the podium. Let's play the music, and now let's all pray. Which is lovely, and it absolutely has its place. But I wanted more, because I don't want spirit to be relegated to Sunday mornings. Spirit is 100% all the time the experience we are having as life itself in this physical form. And so let's celebrate that no matter what, whenever and wherever we are. So I thought, here's an opportunity. I'm living in a college town. It'll be a great place for students to show up and get this message earlier than I got this message. Because, boy, I'll tell you, had I known this 20 years ago, my life would have been very different. I would have been a much better actor. You know why? Because I found my authentic self instead of trying to be something else on stage. If more actors understood that being their authentic selves was going to actually benefit them, they would stop trying to play the part. So what do I want to create? The Consciousness Cafe. Okay. So now that's feeling daunting. Because now I'm thinking, oh, well, now I'm talking about food service and a whole staff and like finding the space and getting the food service equipment. I'm like, oh, there's a lot of overhead that I'm going to have to deal with there. Okay. So I'm going to do the standard Sunday. Hello, welcome. Let's sing, let's pray, and here's a talk. Emerson said, once you make a decision, the universe conspires to make it happen. One of my favorite quotes. I feel like, I've been up here for a while. Because I now have another part of this whole story, and I'm going to try and do this as quickly as I can. So, the conspiring to make this vision happen has been unfolding in ways that I didn't quite recognize, but now I fully see. And it is this. There is a bakery and cafe in Tucson called Dedicated Gluten-Free Bakery and Cafe. Now, my sister introduced me to this place because she has celiac, which is, if you don't know what celiac is, that is the ultimate expression of the allergy to gluten, which is the protein in wheat and other grains, some other grains. So a gluten-free bakery is basically saying we're not using any wheat products, and whatever you have in this space is completely allergen-free if you are celiac or have a gluten intolerance. So I'm introduced to this place, and I meet the owner, and we become friends, and I think, oh, well, I'm looking for a space for Sundays. Maybe I can try this Consciousness Cafe idea in this space. And so we met in the cafe for a month back in July. And it was great, and there were so many distractions with customers coming in and going out, and the espresso machine and the things, and they're foaming milk, and I thought, okay, July is enough. I'm going to move on to find a space that's a little more user-friendly for this type of spiritual experience. But I still was going to Dedicated as a customer. And it's a comfortable space. I went there to start prepping for a class that I was teaching online. And yes, online classes are as simple as clicking a button in your email. I just want you to know that. And I was sitting there, and it was a class on, because why not teach a class on financial prosperity when you're starting a new center, right? So I'm prepping a class on financial prosperity, and I'm going through all of the curriculum that I'm creating for it, and doing the spiritual practice that I'm going to be leading the students through, and saying, if I'm willing to commit to this spiritual practice, then I can teach it. If I'm not willing to commit to the spiritual practice, I should not teach it. So I'm there for several hours at Dedicated one day, and I get up to walk out the door, and the owner has come in the meantime, and we greet each other, and she says, oh, how are things in your new space on Sundays? I said, oh, they're going really well. Like, it's a lovely place. And I said, how are things here? And then you hear, oh, well, it's okay, but we're really understaffed. So if you know of anybody who's looking for a job, I thought, well, I could actually pick up a few extra bucks. And I said, why don't you, think of me to come in, and I'll work minimum wage in a staff position here for a while. And she looked at me, and I don't think she understood how to take that, because she thought, but you've run organizations. And so she stepped away, and I went about my business. And I contacted her a few days later, sent an email. I just said, I just want you to know that I am really serious. Like, I'm willing to come in and help you out and help you staff up. And then when it's time, I'll move on to my next thing. So, cut to, my sister and I one day get on the phone with each other and say, we're having a challenge. And no one here has challenges, I understand. But I was having a challenge that day, and I said, I think it's time to really step into some visioning work. And she said, great, come on over. We'll do some visioning work, we'll create some vision boards, and we'll launch into our next thing. Great. So I go to my sister's house, and with the intention of visioning, I walk through her front door, and here is the owner of Dedicated calling me on the phone. And she says, well, I've taken into consideration what we talked about. And I think that I'm not really sure that you stepping into a minimum wage staff position is really right, but I have this idea, and it actually involves your sister. And I said, well, I happen to be at my sister's house right now. Why don't I put her on speakerphone? And so we put her on speakerphone, and we start having a conversation, and like something's bubbling up through me. I'm going, something's happening here. I said, are you at Dedicated right now? She said, yeah. So we go to Dedicated, we sit down, the three of us, and we have a meeting, and she basically says, and I don't want to tell tales out of school because this is her story to tell. She's having some challenges, and the challenges are with the business, but it's also wrapped up into some physical challenges that she's been experiencing. And she basically was ready to throw her hands up and say, I'm done, 4 years. I don't care if I have to pay on this lease anymore. I'm done. I'm walking away. And she said, but I don't really want to do that to the gluten-free community. I don't really want to, because it's a successful business. And I said, okay. She said, do you think there's any way that you and your sister might have an interest in stepping into taking over this business? And we thought, well, perhaps. My sister's a perfect candidate for it. She's a certified nutritionist who specializes in celiac disease now. And so here is an opportunity for her to serve on a daily basis for every single person who walks through the door. And here I'm thinking, well, there's the Consciousness Cafe. When you make a decision, the universe conspires to make it happen. We are in the process of the negotiation right now. But what we're looking at is within a year, my sister and I, thank you, my sister and I will be in some fashion either the owners or the full-time operators of this business. And we get to create around it as well. So, any concern I had with the limitations of overhead, right, those are gone. I've been handed a gift. In doing so, I have confirmed something for myself. That my life, my entire meaning and expression in life is to be for giving. Oh, wait. Consider forgiveness. Consider forgiving. Consider being for giving. Because when I gave over to being open to give, look what came into my sphere. A potential expression of the highest form of ministry at this time. The perfect evolution of an idea that was planted way back in ministerial studies. But I had to be open to being for giving. Giving of myself. Forgiveness is the highest form of love. Forgiveness is the highest form of love. It is a vibration of love that means you are unstoppable when you are at that level of vibration. When I am forgiving, I no longer live in fear. When I am forgiving, I no longer live in lack. When I am forgiving, I no longer live in limitation, because I understand that being forgiving also means I can be open to receive, and I live in the flow. I became an unkinked hose for spiritual flow in that moment. So consider forgiveness. It is the activity of transcendence. Consider forgiveness. It is the activity of opening up to the truth of our being. Consider forgiveness. It is the way to illuminate a darkened path. Consider forgiveness, because giving is the nature of the divine, and that is who and what you and I all are. Namaste. Thank you. Thank you.
So there it is. That's the talk I gave today at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. I'm so grateful that you've popped in and watched today. Grateful to always, as always, to have our online community so invested and involved in Tucson New Thought. And I want to let you know, if you are open to giving, to being for giving, you have the opportunity to share with us your financial expression of wealth. You can click on a link and offer a donation, and we are so grateful for all that we receive and all that it does to support this thriving new ministry in Tucson, and looking forward to see how it all continues to expand and unfold. So thank you so much for all that you are and all that you give. And I look forward to being back in service at our Sunday gathering next week. And I wish you all a really, really wonderful, wonderful week. Namaste.